that you just are basically damned if you do and damned if you don't, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because then we receive contradictory cultural messages from all fronts. Men who are too passive are seen as weak, while men who are assertive are instantly toxic and patriarchal. So it's very difficult to find that, to muster that courage to just try and act as a man made in God's image.
Hey, my name is Steve Hinton, and I serve as a pastor and author.
And I'm your co-host, Matthias. I serve as a personal trainer and a volunteer at my local church.
We want to welcome you to The Man Identity, a podcast that is dedicated to calling up young men into purposeful manhood, which is ultimately found in Jesus Christ and being made in the image of God.
In a culture that is often deliberately set against young men, we're here to intentionally build hope, clarity, and strength into the hearts of these men who are searching for purpose. Together, we will face tough issues head on, throw down some weekly challenges, and have some fun along the way.
Because solid manhood is not automatic, but rather it's a choice. We're here to walk alongside you and encourage you to live out your authentic identity in being made in the image of God for a purpose larger than you have ever imagined.
So join us now for another episode of The Man Identity. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of The Man Identity. We got another special guest, as always, this week. His name is Juan Domínguez.
Yes.
Steve, you've showed me and shared with me some of this guy's material. So I want you to just kind of tell the audience, how did you get in contact with Juan? What led you to kind of reaching out to him and kind of starting this conversation with him?
Yeah. Well, the backstory is I got an email from my wife, and part of the challenge there is, guys, when you get married, listen to your bride.
Mm-hmm.
God gave you that bride for a reason. But Debbie sent me a link to a new platform called Substack. And I wasn't aware of Substack until about 6 months ago, but it's a platform not for, it's not like Twitter, it's not like Facebook, but it's where people upload long content and books, long articles. It's more of an academic thinking type thing than it is a, clickbait, Twitter, emotional type thing. So I started picking around with that, and I created my own account where I am moving a blog post onto that. And, if there are any Substack followers out there, go ahead and find me. But in doing that, I'm just reading articles, and I'm always looking for content about God, content about truth, and content about, men's ministry. And I came across a Substack account called Simple Men. And I just began to read this, and I thought, well, this is good. This is good. This guy knows what he's talking about. And then I noticed the name, Juan Domínguez, and I went over and found him. And the more I read his content, in particular, two sets of material that we're going to talk about today, I thought, boy, we just need to get this guy on The Man Identity. And, kind of like Justin Brierley from last week, I just said, I'm just going to reach out. And, sometimes we reach out and, we don't get anything, but sometimes we do. And that's why we need to keep trying. And I want that to be a lesson to the guys out there to just keep trying.
Yeah. Don't be afraid of rejection.
Yeah. And the truth is you're going to get rejected. You're going to get rejected. It's just going to happen, but you're also going to get some yeses as well. So you just keep going. But yeah, Juan got back to me. And the funny thing was, it was my wife, Debbie, he pointed out first, because she read some of Juan's materials that she thought, his writing is good, written well, proper English there. And that's the point. She thought, it kind of reads like he's not a native speaker and maybe learned British English. I thought, well, that's interesting. So we got online and started talking. And indeed, Juan is from Bogotá, Colombia. English is his second language. But the connection being, he just had so much material that I thought, okay, our audience needs this material. And I want to do that in The Man Identity. I want to highlight guys who are saying the right thing. I want to encourage them and encourage their work. So when I thought about you and me, I thought, okay, we can't do it all.
Yeah.
But I wanted to do two angles. One is a lot of what Juan does is kind of heady, big thought type material. And then some of those are just quick, here are 10 points. So I asked Juan to talk to me about a series of articles that he has on his Substack account, simply called The War on Christian Manhood. And that's spot on to where we're at right now. And we didn't discuss all 5 articles. We discussed the first one and the third one, which talk about the problem. And then we discussed the last 2 that kind of gave us and answer. And then we went on to the second one, which was a standalone, just an article by itself, simply titled 10 Things That Gentlemen Do, or I guess rather 10 Unspoken Rules of Manhood. And I thought, oh my goodness, that can be an episode
in and of itself. Yeah. But
in and of itself. Yeah.
Well, I like that you brought you brought more philosophical, the deep thinking stuff, and then just the practical 10 step list of things.
Yeah.
I think that's a good combination for this episode. So is there any more information that you'd like us to know or anything like that before we dive on in?
Well, everybody make sure you check the show notes. Juan is in Bogotá. He's got an amazing Substack account, and we're gonna have to put that in the show notes because I don't know, is it .com, whatever. We will put that in there. He also has 3 books that you can buy on Amazon. I've purchased one of them. It's a daily devotion. It's like 107 days, and it's a very, very easy read. So we will have the information on there. So guys can find his material, follow it, and encourage him as well. So that's it. I'm hungry. Let's get into this.
All right, let's roll it.
I'm not sure when I first came across your Substack material, but I was caught from the get-go. You had a lot of really solid material. Some of it was very philosophical, very heady. You can have a book in a lot of those, but a lot of your posts were just short, standalone. Hey, here are 5-10 things a guy needs to know. And I believe that today young men need both of those. They need to know the why, what the issue is, what the problem is, why it's a problem, what do I do about it? But then a lot of times they just need some simple, practical, hey, do this, get up, make your bed, change the oil. And you have attacked the issue from both of those directions. And I just find it so fascinating. Your writing is so well, especially our listeners need to know, if they haven't already figured out, you're actually not an English speaking born person, which shows that, you know what you're talking about. But out of all that you wrote, I really liked the 5-part series that you had on the war against Christian men, which kind of zooms into why I kicked off this podcast in the first place. And it's a 5-part series. We don't have to do all of it, but Juan, can you tell me why you started that series? And I think number one, just looking at installment maybe 1 and 3, what the problem is, what kicked this whole thing off.
Yeah, of course. Thank you first of all for the invitation, Steve, to the podcast, and for the kind words about the blog. As you said, I'm very intentional in trying to write content that is not only philosophical but also very practical. I think, like you said, it's key to work on both aspects, to both go deep into certain topics and understand why things are the way they are, and also keep it more practical and know how to move forward and actually take action to improve in certain areas. So that also ties in nicely with the War on Christian Men, the series that we're talking about, because as you probably saw when you read the articles, the first 2 are somewhat dark in a way, because my intention was to just take a look at what's going on from a very honest perspective, which it's not always very encouraging for Christian men, at least for the last couple of decades. We've not had it easy. Men in general haven't had it easy. We are being in many ways put down by a culture that sees masculinity as the ultimate enemy. And then also our faith has been very much under attack by the progressive liberal influences that have gained power over the last couple of decades and years. So I just wanted to not hide from the reality, and the reality is that there's a spiritual war going on, and that there's an enemy, which is the devil, that wants very much to keep men, and specifically Christian men, effeminate, scared, apathetic, right? And then after seeing that, after opening our eyes to the reality of what it is we're facing, then we can devise strategies and action plans to maybe fight back against the enemy, against the spiritual enemy, and find ways in which we can start to take back many of the things that we have lost in our culture. So the broad background of the series.
In Juan, I think you were spot on. Pointing the finger at the real issue. The real issue, my observation, is not political. It's not social, but spiritual. And it takes me back to Genesis chapter 3, that Satan is directly opposed to God. Satan cannot win against God, so Satan's going to attack the image of God. And when it comes to humanity, Adam was created first. So if Satan can't attack and defeat men, that's going to take the whole family and the whole culture down as well. So it's just, it's attacking the image of God in manhood. So in your article, especially those, part 1 and 3, what are some of the agencies or tools that we see that the enemy or culture is using to attack manhood?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think, like you said as well, that we have to always remember in these conversations that the enemy is spiritual, but he can use tools in the real world, and he can manifest himself in politics, in academia, in culture, in many ways, right? But one mistake I've seen many people make on the, let's say, right-wing side of the conversation is that they try to find an enemy here in the real world. So whether that's the Democratic Party or politicians or whatever, right? Whereas maybe those are groups that have been infiltrated by evil and by the enemy, but they are not per se the enemy. They're just tools that the enemy are using. So with that, one of the things I mentioned in the first part of the series, which is called the architects of emasculation, is first of all that this attack on Christian men, very much like you've said, is intentional, and it's orchestrated by an enemy that wants Christian men to forget, well, who they are, why they are here for, and the fact that they are here, created in the image of God, and that they have a very specific role to play in their families, communities, which is to serve, to lead, and to protect. So the tools that I mentioned that the enemy uses and has been using to attack Christian masculinity or to attack Christian men, first of all, is academia. I think it's a very sad reality that most schools and most universities are now pushing agendas that are clearly anti-Christian.
Yes.
Sometimes explicitly, but most of the times it's very implicit. They hide behind this idea of secularity, or of not pushing any religion, and what they end up doing is pushing this religion of progressivism and liberalism,
humanism, and
individualism. So academia has been one of the main tools the enemy uses, and we can anecdotically speak about how many people have gone through university and end up being greatly indoctrinated into leftist ideology. I can tell you firsthand how my university worked, and it was just crazy. And this is something that I believe I mentioned in the article as well. It was just crazy how frequent the progressive campaigns were pushed, and they were hiding them under behind this idea of equality, right? But it was a very subtle anti-male rhetoric that was prevalent in all of these campaigns, and anti, let's call it, Christian values, in the sense that it was always pushing gay and transgender ideologies. It was always pushing feminist ideologies. So it's no wonder that when younger generations go through university, where they feel like they're going to be educated, so their minds are open to whatever they're going to receive. They're hoping to receive the best, or the epitome of human knowledge and wisdom, and then so they are very primed to be misguided by these ideologies, because they are precisely waiting for someone to tell them what they should believe. So academia works as a very strong indoctrination tool that the enemy has been using, to get this subtle rhetoric, anti-male, anti-Christian rhetoric into the minds of the younger generations. So that's the first tool, let's say, that I mentioned. The second one is media, and I think this one is much more evident. If we dare to open our eyes and try to be objective about what it is we're consuming and seeing, but it's from the music we consume. It has, like, the popular music that gets promoted the most, is always very very, again, maybe not always explicitly anti-Christian, but definitely implicitly anti-Christian values.
Right.
It pushes a hedonistic lifestyle, outright degeneracy in many ways. And we can see that also in movies, where it's very difficult to watch a movie that doesn't have, for example, sexually explicit content all the time, or a TV show, right? Or a normalization of homosexual behavior, right? Or not even just that kind of deranged, I don't know if deranged is the word, but disordered sexual behavior, but also hedonistic lifestyles, whether that's heterosexual, homosexual, whatever. It just normalizes a lot of behaviors that us Christians definitely stand against and wish to eradicate in our own lives, and wish to to rise above. So I think media is also a big tool in the enemy's arsenal, also because we are very addicted to it. We are at a day and age where a lot of content. So it's just naturally our brains are getting rewired by the things we consume, and if it's always something that subtly normalizes a lifestyle that doesn't go according to our values, then we are going to start maybe walking in that direction as well.
Yeah, I don't think deranged is a bad word. It's similar to what Paul uses at the end of Romans chapter 1, where multiple times God gives them over. Mankind says, "I don't need you, God," and God gives them over, and it gets to a point where I think in one of the English translations it says God gives them over to a depraved mind. In other words, they can't think logically again. So I don't think it's a bad word. It makes sense that people are exposed to something long enough, and they do it long enough, they form these patterns in their mind, and that constructs their worldview, and therefore how they function. So I think that's pretty applicable.
Yeah, exactly. So I think just because we are surrounded by those sort of messages constantly in the world, and in the culture we live in, unless you are very vigilant and aware of what it is you're consuming, you will naturally start to drift or tend towards those thoughts and behaviors, right? So that's what I was trying to communicate in this first article, that all this, even, and then I go to talk about government and maybe some laws that are distinctively anti-men, and also corporations which constantly promote feminist ideologies and leftist ideologies that also are either implicitly or explicitly anti-male. So we are in this echo chamber where everything seems to be pushing that ideology, that leftist ideology, and that anti-male rhetoric. So it's inevitable that we start to drift in that direction unless we strengthen ourselves in the Word, through Christ and in prayer, and become very aware of who we are and what it is we're called to do, and also of the influences that are around us, trying to maybe take us away from that.
Yeah. I thought the title of your third installment in that series was so accurate to the psychological castration. I thought, oh my goodness, Juan is, even though he's not a native English speaker, he knows how to use the English language. I thought that was a perfect title, describing some of the problems. So can you unpack that a little bit? What are some illustrations of that psychological castration that's going on primarily in the Western world?
Yeah, I think, and thank you as well for that. I also thought that was a very accurate title. I think the main thing that always jumps to mind is the fact that this has been changing over the last couple of years, but before then, every time anyone mentioned masculinity, it was only with the prefix toxic, right? It was always masculinity. It was never healthy masculinity. It was never Christian masculinity. It was never just masculinity. It was everything masculine is toxic. And that was, the message was, we're in this mess because men are oppressors, because men have been doing X and Y and ruining everything. So we need to make men more like women, because all masculinity is toxic. And that has been changing, because thankfully many men have started to speak up, many women have started to speak up and realize,
a number of women too.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, this just makes no sense, in a way. So yeah, but the psychological castration campaign, I would say, is it's difficult to pinpoint in a way, but it's it's the way that the enemy is using this rhetoric of toxic masculinity, of the patriarchy, and assigning very negative connotations to everything that relates to men, right? And it starts since early childhood, like in schools where boys are being medicated for maybe acting with more energy or being more chaotic in the way they behave. But that's just the way boys behave.
Boys have more energy. Yeah. Boys want to get out. Yeah.
It's not something that is necessarily wrong, not at all. It's just a different way of behaving, because there's a reality that there's, like, we are different in the way we are built and constructed by God, right? But I think this psychological campaign starts with weaponizing language against men, so that it almost, a couple of years ago, it was almost impossible to speak, because you immediately would just be assigned a label,
right?
That would disqualify you from the cultural conversation. The enemy, I think, did this very effectively with the toxic masculinity, with the patriarchy, with the cries of misogyny or mansplaining anytime a man did anything, right? So it was a very successful campaign that started with language, that seeped into even schooling and again academia, since early childhood, and I think that's the where that naturally leads to, is that it makes it very difficult for men to know how to act, because they cannot express themselves naturally, because their natural competitiveness will be called powerful aggression, or their natural leadership instincts as domination, or their protective instincts as toxic and controlling behavior. Like, these are qualities that men need to develop and order correctly for them to be expressed virtuously. But these are, at the end of the day, qualities that are inherently good, that when they are assigned a negative label just outright, then men stop feeling confident enough to act like men, because they feel like any expression of male behavior, natural male behavior, is going to have a social pushback in a way.
So there's a lot of confusion there.
A lot of confusion, and that's like the conclusion I mostly draw from in this article. It's that you just are basically damned if you do and damned if you don't, right? Because then we receive contradictory cultural messages from all fronts. Men who are too passive are seen as weak. Men who are assertive are instantly toxic and patriarchal. So it's very difficult to find that, to muster that courage to just try and act as a man made in God's image, when if you do this, you get backlash, and if you do that, you also get backlash.
Yeah. I took note in one of your points had to do with the removing of male spaces. And immediately I thought about, and this is a context in America, but the removing of Boy Scouts of America. It's now become scouting. I'm not sure what your context there is in Colombia, but unless you're talking a professional football team, and I know, what are we talking about, American football or European or South American soccer, but unless you're talking a professional sporting team, where are places that men can just be with men? There are fewer and fewer situations like that.
Yeah. And I agree. Like, those places are being eliminated quickly and also intentionally, because, and this is also a point I make in the article, like, if we were still naturally part of such groups, these groups could provide us with the strength and courage necessary to resist this psychological conditioning, right? Because we could maybe, be open and honest and have a real safe place where we can discuss this, like how should we act as men, but we won't come to that conclusion if we're completely isolated. And if everything that surrounds us is telling us otherwise, we'll just come to the conclusion that we are the ones who are maybe wrong, right? So I think that's also been very, very efficient, a very efficient tool to isolate men, to make them confused. And what this all ends up leading to is to just a crisis of apathy and loneliness, and men choosing just to retreat. It's like, I'm getting criticized left and right, if I do, if I don't. The culture doesn't want me to be a man. Women hate a man who's passive and weak. They'll never date me if I'm passive and weak, but they'll criticize me if I'm strong and courageous. So it's just too much confusion, and they end up just retreating, in the best case scenario, just being lonely, worst case, committing suicide, or harming themselves because they don't know what else to do. So I think it's a very sad reality, which thankfully I think it's starting to change because we're seeing more open discourse about this. But that's just the way it's been over the last couple of years.
Well, Juan, as we walk through the series of articles, you offered some hope in parts 4 and 5, remembering where we've been and thinking about the future. What do you mean by all that? Unpack some of that.
Yeah, well, I love that, because after staring into the abyss, so to speak, we can then look upwards and see the light, and see that there's hope, and we can find a way, and we can find a purpose, and we can find a way to resist this conditioning, while also developing ourselves into purposeful men. And the beauty of it is that I relate very much to this process, because I found also my path and my purpose out of this conditioning, or out of the confusion, by getting to know Christ, which is
okay.
I believe I mean, he's the ultimate light and the ultimate answer that can point us the way as to how we should behave as men. And it's very beautiful that when the world is telling you a bunch of different things, even sometimes people with good intentions are telling you things as to how you should act, how you should behave as a man, the only place where you'll find the answer is in Christ. Like that's the model of man that we should aim to imitate, right? That's where we find our answer as to how a man should be. So it's very beautiful to understand that in our faith, in the Christian faith, we have that perfect model of man. We have that perfect model of masculinity, who shows us how we should try to behave in every situation. And he shows us all the wide range of emotions that we can have,
Yes.
showing his righteous anger as well at times, but showing his deep, profound mercy and compassion. Like, I feel bad for the men who don't know Christ, because they're missing out on precisely that perfect model, who's going to lead them and teach them and transform them into the men that are purposeful and full of life, basically.
Yeah, Jesus, wow, he lived with complete purpose. He didn't allow people to push his buttons. He set his agenda. Even when he was before Pilate going to the cross, it was on his terms. And I think the beautiful thing there is that a young man who grew up without a dad, or a good dad, he can find purpose in Jesus Christ. He can find purpose in the perfect Father, the God of all creation. So now, you mentioned in your article Jesus, but you also kind of reference looking to men, godly men of the past, those who've gone before us. Not so much the guys who are in the media today, but even some very ancient past. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's also something that I've recently come to terms with, because of course, our model is Jesus, right? We hope to, and we try, and we will try to imitate him with all our might. But sometimes we are so far away from him, and we will always be, that it's difficult to know how to act like him practically, But in the Christian faith, there's this very rich tradition of men who have done things right in many ways, who have followed Christ faithfully in multiple different states of life, professions, vocations. So sometimes it's, I would say, simpler to look at those great men who maybe have gone through similar things that you are going through, right? That maybe are struggling with similar temptations, similar sins, that maybe have similar careers or vocations, because it's much easier to imitate them as they imitate Christ than to imitate Christ directly, because there's such a big gap between us and him, right? So I think it's very cool as well to see that it's not like, if you're not perfect, you're not worthy, or you're not whatever. We know that we are flawed, and that's a given, but you can still strive for holiness and strive to follow Christ faithfully, and you can use all these models of masculinity, of Christian masculinity, that have existed, that have shown the way from multiple different paths as to how they have progressed in their path to virtue.
And none of these men were perfect. you even go back and you look at the men in the Bible, Abraham and David. They were all flawed, but they kept on getting up and following God day in, day out. So it's not we're looking for the perfection, because we're not going to be, but getting up daily and following Jesus. So so we've looked at the past. Your final installment had to do with going forward. What are some pointers there?
Yeah. So after like understanding that there is a way forward and that we have a guiding light in Christ and little lights in the men who have followed him faithfully in the past, then I try to bring it back into the practical. I as I mentioned at the beginning, and you as well, like I try to make it very practical, because that's also something that I missed at the beginning of my journey, I would say, is practical advice. Okay, like the philosophical is cool, but how do I apply this in my life, right? So that's what the final installment is. And I try to make it as clear and as simple as possible. But I started by saying that we have to begin with us. We have to reform ourselves first.
There you are. Yeah. It's easy to point at the world. It's easy to point at others. It's easy to point at our fathers or lack of fathers or whoever. It's another thing to look in the mirror. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's probably the most difficult step. It is painful in many ways. It forces you to look at yourself in the mirror and recognize your many flaws, your many mistakes, your constant sinning, and your constant giving into temptation, and also in a way your participation in this in this cultural decay, right? Because through our mistakes and our sins, we're also somehow collaborating in creating this, or in allowing evil to propagate, right?
Okay.
Because we also carry a little piece of that within us, whether we want to or not, right? So I think we have to start by trying to reform ourselves, by trying to purify ourselves from at least the sins that are more evident or more prevalent. So I start by recommending, because that's one of the most difficult things that young guys, even Christian and otherwise, struggle with nowadays, and that's sexual temptation, pornography, casual sexual encounters, and so on, which is something that I've written amply about. And it's also very well received because it's a very real pain point. So starting by trying to purify that, living a more chaste lifestyle, and then also striving to build a life of virtue in which you learn maybe leadership capabilities, in which you also strengthen yourself spiritually by reading the Bible, by learning about the traditions of our faith, by actually knowing why you believe what you
Yes.
believe, and by getting close to Christ also, in that way, right? Like not just in the emotional way, in the personal relationship way, but also in the very rational way of it makes sense to believe in God. Like there's a logic behind it. So it's just a very in-depth description of how I think we should go about reforming ourselves, by trying to quit some vices and sins, and trying to build virtue, by actively doing things that build us up. And then after we've done that, at least to a bare minimum standard where we are stable and we are at least a bit more ordered in our lives, we can then start preparing to make some real impact, right, and to lead. And then only after we've done that, we can move on to the next step, which is trying to impact our communities and our families and lead them towards something better, right? But it has to start with us building ourselves, because otherwise we will be leading them astray. And of course, this is a constant process. It's not like you build yourself over a month.
Yeah, it's a very much. Yeah. I'm 56 and I'm still.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it's at least, putting in the work and the effort to build yourself into something better, so that you can then, in all honesty, try and guide the people who will look up to you and depend on you, because that's just what's going to happen as a man. There's always going to be people depending on you, whether you have a small family, a big family, and there's always going to be someone who's looking up to you, and you can either guide them towards Christ or in a different direction, right? So we have to know that and understand that that's a burden that we carry, the burden of responsibility. But we can only assume that burden after we have put in the effort and tried to really build ourselves up. So yeah, and then after we've maybe started to take those steps to to become the righteous leaders in our family, in our marriage, in our communities, then we can really try and put an effort into supporting the right institutions, or even creating them, right? Into donating to causes that actually make a difference, to cultural causes that actually make a difference, voting for politicians who actually, well, share hopefully all, but if not most of our values,
right?
Funding initiatives or creating initiatives that help like change the cultural narrative. So I think it starts with us, and then slowly we start to put what we're learning and growing out into the world by leading and by creating and being very active um, in being intentional about trying to elicit some change, some cultural change in the world.
Juan, I love that. And you spoke of practicality, and I noted when we began the conversation that a number of your articles are they're a standalone, but they're very quick and they're very purposeful. And I like the one. It was interesting. One of your first images there is a picture of James Bond, and and part of that had to do with not just being a man, but being a gentleman. And James Bond, the British guy, certainly had a very genuinely swagger about him. But the title of the article was 10 Unspoken Rules for Masculinity. And some of these are just incredibly simple and practical. But can you walk us down those? And you started out with, 10 and you worked down to number 1, but what are 10 unspoken rules of masculinity? Here are 10 things a guy needs to know and a guy needs to do.
Yeah. That's also one of my favorite articles. I think it contrasts very nicely with the whole War on Christian Men series, because it's, as you said, very, very practical, very to the point, very short, but it just ties nicely into it, because it's a way of me trying to tell you precisely how you can start building yourself up, so you can become that leader that then affects culture positively. So yeah, so the rules are rules about behavior, the way a gentleman should behave. And number 10 is to keep your word, even when it hurts or when it's inconvenient. And I'll just run you through maybe all of the 10 rules very quickly. But this one is basically that a gentleman needs to be reliable, and if you are not keeping your word in the small things, then you can be trusted with the bigger ones. And
yeah,
it comes straight from scripture, right? Like, he who is faithful in the little will be also when he's given much. So it's the same here. If you're breaking your word constantly in seemingly small matters, it will be very easy for you to break it in matters more important.
I like how you said small matters. Something for me is, if you tell someone you're going to meet them at 5, don't show up at 5:15. And all the way up to big things. You're working on a contract that you shouldn't need an attorney. Why? Because everybody's keeping their word. So I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, if you arrive late to a meeting with a friend, for example, and of course we all fail at this, right? Like, and I want to be very clear about that. I fail at this all the time.
Yeah, none of us are perfect, but it's the lifestyle that we're wanting to lead.
Exactly. But if in that example, if you're late for a meeting with a friend, you'll be more comfortable being late delivering a project, for example.
There you are.
With things that actually do have an impact. Number 9 was just stand up when you shake hands or greet someone. And I actually just realized I miswrote greet. That's my non-English mind working. But it's basically just a very small gesture that immediately dignifies the other person. It's just recognizing their presence and being respectful enough to stand up for them as a gesture of respect, which socially is always going to be a positive. You're never going to, this is never going to be a drawback. And it also, it starts like the way, in a more philosophical sense, the way you behave also builds the way you think and who you are.
Yeah.
So by you being someone who makes the effort to stand up and greet someone, that trains you to respect the dignity of each person a little bit more.
I read that, and in addition, I also thought, look them in the eye.
Yeah.
I remember when my boys were young, I would, and even my daughters, I would say, when you're talking to someone, look them in the eye.
Yeah. It's the same thing at the end of the day. It's making the other person feel seen, recognized, and dignified. It's like, I'm greeting you, I'm paying attention to you, and recognizing that you're a person to be respected. Then number 8 is a bit more about chivalry, and it's to walk on the curbside when we don't want, which it's so funny, but it's such a simple thing that women instantly recognize. And when I started doing this, I noticed that it was, it made a difference, because it communicates that you are there to protect her, that you pay attention to the small things, that you care for her safety. So it's a very kind thing to do, and even if this is not just for you to do with your wife or girlfriend, it's with any girl you're walking with or woman you're walking with. It's a small gesture that communicates that you are aware of your role as a man, and that you care about their well-being. So it's very nice, I think.
Yeah, it's that physical idea that if a car comes by and gets off the road or throws something off the road, it's going to hit you and not the girl. You can protect the girl.
Yeah, and it's modeling that sacrificial masculinity that, once again, Christ exemplifies perfectly, right?
Yeah,
of course, in much lesser extent.
Much lesser, but it's all the little things that build the big things. Juan, that was so good. I also thought about this on stairs, going up and down stairs, that when you have a man and a woman going up and down stairs, that the guy should go first down, because if she trips, she's going to hit him, and he could block her or cushion her from hitting. If we're going up the stairs, that he would have her go first again. So if she trips, she's going to fall on him instead of, hitting her head on the, on the concrete. So it's the protection. Well, I just love that you put that in there, that we're walking on the,
That's great. I actually hadn't thought about the stairs example, but I think I'll also start doing that, because I hadn't recognized that. And I think it's the same. It's just physically putting yourself between potential danger and someone you care about and want to protect. But that's awesome. So number 7 is to pay your debts quickly and without reminders, because there are very, very few things which are more uncomfortable than you having to chase someone to collect money, right? So it's very disrespectful to not be on top of that, and not, because at the end, a debt is also a promise. So it's, again, you breaking your word if you're not paying it willfully and in due time.
Right.
Then number 6, and I'll go through this quickly, is to never brag, because it just goes directly against the virtue of humility and modesty. And it's a great way to show others that you are very insecure, to the point that you need to be constantly reminding yourself and others that you're so great, right? I wrote also number 5 is dress with intention, and this is simply because it showcases that you realize that your image says something about the values that you hold dear, that taking care of yourself and of your appearance. And this doesn't mean like wear expensive clothes or anything like that. It just pay a little bit of attention and take some time to think about what you want to present to the world, and then dress intentionally in that way. Number 4 is one which I think is very, very important, is to never speak ill of your wife or family. Which is very, very sad that this is something that many, many people do. Even me, I do it sometimes, and it's very, very sad. It's like, these are the people that love you the most, that trust you the most, and sometimes we do it just to maybe gain social approval, or at the expense of a joke or whatever. But I do believe that we need to be very principled with this, and to show that we are loyal, not only in our marriage or whatever, but loyal to the people who are on our side, by never speaking ill of them in public. If you have something that you need to talk with someone or criticize about someone who you love, you do it in private,
in person.
Exactly.
And then you do it with love too.
Exactly. Not jokingly, and not to gain social approval, because it's a way of guarding the honor of the people who you love, right?
I love the way you said that, guarding the honor. I love the way you said that.
It's again that protective image of the Christian man, right? Who wants to sacrifice himself, and maybe that desire to fit in by complaining about his wife, but sacrificing that for her sake, right? Then we're getting to the top 3, and that's number 3: admit when you're wrong immediately. It's just very, very much a sign of humility to be able to recognize your mistakes,
and own it. Yeah,
it's also a sign of confidence, because like, you're not fazed by the fact that you make mistakes. You realize that you are flawed and that you also err. So I think that's very important, and also very uncommon in this prideful day and age where we all want to one up one another, right? Like, I'm better than you, I'm more right than you, whatever. So it's just refreshing to be with someone who is able to say, like, you know what, yeah, I was wrong, I'm sorry, and that's it, right? Number 2 is to serve first. Yeah.
And you quoted Jesus there.
Yeah, absolutely, because it all ends up going back to him, and in this point, it's more clear than ever. He says himself that he came not to be served but to serve and to give his life, right? And if we are trying to imitate him, we're also called to serve. So if we're not doing that, then what are we doing, right? Like, are we serving ourselves? Are we serving the devil, our desires? We need to be serving God, and we need to be serving others as the main guiding principle behind our actions. And then finally, number 1 is to remember that you're not the main character. And again,
that was a good way to put that.
Yeah, I think we suffer from main character syndrome, especially the younger generations with social media and stuff. So it's just remembering your place. We are, of course, we have dignity, we are loved, we are created in the image of God, and that means we are valuable and very, very, very worthy. But that doesn't mean it's all about us. That doesn't mean the world should revolve around us. Quite the opposite. It means we are here to be grateful about those gifts, and be grateful with God for having created us and having blessed us with life and with all the blessing He's given us, and to remember to give the glory to Him, and it's not ours.
Would the word responsibility fit in here? That God created us, He created us in His image. He has blessed us, and instead of living selfishly, living with, okay, I have a responsibility to the God who has blessed me this way.
Yeah. It's you have a responsibility to use productively, and not in the broader sense, the gifts that you've been given. You have a responsibility to, like the parable of the talents, right, from the Gospels. You have a responsibility to use the things God has given you and use them for the right purpose, and that is not to elevate yourself, glorify yourself, or just chase pleasure and whatever your flesh tells you to pursue.
Right. Well, Juan, you have got so much material that is just spot on. Now, if someone's thinking, hey, I want to read more of Juan's material, matter of fact, you've got a couple of books. Where can people go to find your material? I mentioned Substack, which is a platform that I've only been familiar with, I don't know, about 6 months or so. It's kind of like a blog, but it's a platform where many people have their material on it. But where can people find you and find your material and find your work, Juan?
Yeah, so Substack is probably the best place for it. As you said, it's like a social media network that works mostly for long form content, so articles, blogs, and stuff. So it's a really cool place to read more in-depth things and consume content that is actually educational and instructive, as opposed to just quick dopamine of TikTok or Instagram.
Okay, and yeah, long-term content.
Yeah, exactly. So Substack would be the best place. Also Instagram, and then for my books, you can find them all on Amazon. You can just look up Simple Man, that's the pseudonym, or my name, Juan Domínguez, and you also find some of the books there, available worldwide on Amazon.
Okay, so for clarification, the actual, I know you have a personal Substack, but the main one is Simple Men.
Yes, sir. simplemen.substack.com is the...
And that's the same thing with Instagram as well.
Yeah, it's simple. And Instagram, it's the handle is Simple Men Blog.
Okay. And we're going to put this in the show notes. Now, on kind of a personal question, and then turning it into maybe a question of wisdom you can give to young men. In our discussion earlier, I found out that you were engaged, and I'm not sure your fiance would want us to mention her name, but I'm always excited. God created marriage. Marriage is beautiful, and I think men need to get married younger. But you found an amazing young woman who loves Jesus, who loves you. Juan, what advice would you give to a young man who's thinking, I really need to get married. I want to get married.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, where should a young man go to try to find a bride? What are some thoughts? In other words, he's probably not going to get a lot of good traction if he goes, to the local bar on a Saturday night,
I agree. I mean, that's a great question. And I think that's such a big concern for so many young men today. I'll admit I'm very blessed and very lucky to have found my wife to be.
Mm-hmm.
So the more, I'll start with a more philosophical answer and then go into the practical. The more philosophical answer is, and this is something that I've seen firsthand in my life, is I only found her after spending quite a lot of time, a few years, where my sole focus was to make myself the man that God wanted me to be.
Yeah.
And not that I'm there yet, but but after walking that path for a while and actually taking it seriously and actually understanding that maybe if I haven't met my future wife yet, it's because I'm not ready. And in hindsight, that was exactly what was happening. If I had met my the girl I'm going to marry 2 years ago, I wouldn't have been ready because I would have been very, very much lacking a lot of qualities that I have been able to build through God's grace in this time. So I think the first thing is to take the opportunity of being single to be in close communion and contact with God and try to understand what He wants from you and start by walking down that path. And as you build yourself into the man God wants you to be, the likelihood is that He will make it more accessible for you to find the woman that He wants you to marry. And then on the more practical level, you said it perfectly. You probably won't find the woman you're looking for in the world or in the things of the world, in parties, in festivals or whatever. You might. That's a possibility. Stranger things have happened. But I would just try and be very coherent with, if you're looking for a woman of virtue, then look where a woman of virtue might be, right? And that is probably in church. That's probably doing charity work. That's probably doing things that aren't, being surrounded in this crazy worldly lifestyle. So I think coherence is one of the most difficult things to practice. So very often we say like, oh, why can't I find a woman? And when you're partying every single weekend and getting drunk every single weekend, you're not going to find her there.
Right. Or at least not the right one.
Exactly. At least not the right one. So, and this goes back to what I was saying about building yourself up into the man God wants you to be. Because if you change your interests, if you start looking for things which are better and actually build you up and maybe develop interests that are aligned with your faith, well, then you will have plenty of opportunities to meet women who are on the same path. You will always meet the people who are on the same path as you.
Yeah.
And naturally will be just walking in the same direction. And then finally, once you see someone or once you know someone who you think could be a good match, have the courage to just step up and be very clear and direct with your intentions. That doesn't mean propose to her on the spot, but just be the uncommon man and common man who is confident enough and courageous enough to just go up to her and tell her that you want to ask her out. This is something that 99% of men don't do. Women are desperate. Good women are desperate for good men to step up and just lead them and be clear with their intentions. So I would just say, have that courage and you will probably be rewarded for it.
Juan, thank you. And everybody, we've got Juan's information in the show notes. And Juan, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve, for the conversation. Hopefully it's uplifting and useful for your listeners. And yeah, God bless you.
Matthias, Juan made a point that the feel of Article 1, 2, and 3 had a dark feel to that, and I think he's right on. I think he's accurate, but that also kind of makes me want to go back to a point that I made in our first episode. And again, everybody, if you've not listened to the Maiden Voyage, the first episode of the Man Identity, please go back and do that. Mm-hmm. But I made the point that our objective here is not to constantly be pointing out the negative, not to constantly be looking at all the problems in the world that young men are facing, or problems in general, because I believe what we need to first do is build on the positive. Just look at the positive, aim for the positive. But there is a time where we have to point the negative out. If somebody has cancer, you can say, hey, get a better diet, and hey, exercise and all that sort of stuff. Hey, but you need to know that you have cancer and we need to deal with this.
Yeah. You can't start to be guided and seek advice to work around something if you don't know it's there in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's good to know what do I need to look out for? How do I work around this? How am I guided? And horrible with my English. Juan is better with his English than us native English speakers are. But yeah, so how do you guide around these things in life? So I think, it's a good point to make sure we know it, but don't focus on it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, he kicked off the series with the first article, The Architect of Emasculation. And I like the fact that he early on got to the point that the real enemy is Satan, that this is a spiritual warfare. And then he gave some tools as to how this plays out. Matthias, were there any of those from our conversation article itself that really grabbed you first and foremost?
I think yes, absolutely, is the answer. I think the big one, and I think I'm starting to see people wake up to this too, is that the enemy's real good at making us think that a group of people is the enemy rather than himself.
Yeah.
And like he said, let's take the right and the left, for example. The right is real good. We know we are, I think, rightly opposed to a lot of the ideologies of some people in the left, trans, the LGBTQ, whatever ideology, race stuff. And it's like, we know that what's right and wrong, because a lot of the conservative side is our Christian, or knows or stands by those morals.
There's a biblical worldview.
Yeah, there's a biblical worldview
and absolute truth. There's an absolute truth.
Yeah, thank you for helping me phrase that. But it's like, and I think there's, we know from the scriptures that there's powers, evil at work behind government powers and things like that. And we know that they're put in place by God. But all that to say, I'm not trying to get theological. All that to say is the enemy's real good at pitting us against each other, rather than pitting us against him, letting us know he's there, the one doing all that work. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's really easy to see the other side as the enemy rather than the enemy is infiltrated that side. The enemy is the one causing these people to have this downfall of these ideas and thoughts, and kind of getting away from the Christian worldview. So I think that was a really big one that stuck out to me. Is there any way that you want to kind of expand on that, or maybe kind of bring some clarity to that thought?
Well, Juan and I touched on it a little bit. The root of all of this is satanic, and it's a destruction of the image of God. That evil cannot win over light, darkness cannot win over light. Satan attempted to win over the God of all creation. He was not able to. So out of malice, there's this intent to destroy the image of God, which is in humanity. So if Satan can get humanity to doubt God, to walk away from God, to destroy one another, that's a big thing. And I've got to remind myself of this as well, Matthias. Many times I have to go back and say, okay, Steve, what's the real issue? Who is the real enemy? What's really going on? Because my emotions want to, bonk someone on the head. And there may be a time for government to do that, but that's not me. And just knowing that there's a real issue, and we have to keep our eye on the ball. We have to keep our eye on what the real issue is, and not go to the mat on things we don't need to go to the mat on.
Yeah, I think that's good. Picking and choosing your fights, and knowing who you need to fight and who you don't need to fight. And it's not the people, it's the enemy. So with that said, we know what the enemy does. and I know we talked about that. If he can attack the foundation of the family, which is the man, the husband, if he can tear down the patriarchy, so to say, well, then he can tear down the family, and then that tears down the, and further separates the worldview, the Christian worldview, society from the Christian worldview, I should say. So I know that y'all address some of that here in this conversation, and I just kind of want to address some of the tools that the enemy uses for that. And so the first one that y'all talked about was academia.
Yeah.
I myself don't have any personal experience with kind of witnessing this. I was blessed enough to be at a private Christian university. My wallet is not blessed enough to be at that private Christian university. But all that to say is, it's crazy to me because I've heard, and being somebody who's kind of been semi-involved in listening to politics and this and that a lot of that ideology, a lot of that indoctrination comes from college. And it's hard to think of myself because it's like I've had a firm foundation in Christ. Even though I wasn't always living a godly life, I knew what was right and wrong because of my upbringing. So it's kind of hard for myself to picture how this happens. But I know that if they can get the younger generation, especially the men, to start leaning into this and kind of tearing down and Juan talked about how it was more subtle. It's not like it's outright. It's subtle, feminization and emasculization of the men, and basically telling them that their nature is not good.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate some on that, maybe on your experience in academia or what you've seen?
Yeah. Well, I want to back up just a little bit. I think this is important for guys to know. And Juan and I didn't get a chance to talk about this. I would love to have more time to talk to Juan. I just can't afford a plane ticket to Bogotá right now. So people talk about academia, and there is also this idea today that in academia, that if you are smart, you're going to have all these degrees and you're going to deny God. And it becomes somewhat of an arrogance. And there is a misunderstanding that if you are a Christian or a follower of God or not an academic, you're less than, or maybe not even as smart. And that in and of itself is just not true.
Yeah.
There are lots of ways that we grow in our personal academics, the reading that we do, the application that we do. The problem is this, that over the past 100 years in America, and you can really trace this, I can't remember the name of the socialist group that started this, but it was sometime in the 20s in New York, where a dozen, 24 high profile people in America at that time, one of those was the son of one of the presidents, were all atheists, and they gathered together with a strict laser focused plan to infiltrate the academic institutions of America, and slowly remove a biblical worldview. And in doing that, they also, and when you come to logic, it's kind of like building a straw man. You're attacking someone, you're creating something that's not true. And it's this idea that if you're not an academic, well, you're dumb. And that's just not a reality. But with academics in the higher institutions, especially with some of the Ivy League schools, there is an idea that biblical Christianity is simple, it's immature. And, we can go back and we can look at our conversation last week with Justin Brierley, and I really enjoyed talking with him. And you look at the academics in world history, the major university system grew out of the West that had a biblical worldview. So guys need to know that. But with that, there is this reality, and Juan talked about the fact that even in Colombia, it's there that in the higher education, and we want to study and learn things, but you have to look out for an agenda that is pushing something that is directly opposed to God, because it's going to erode everything else. Now, in academics, I'm also thinking, and Juan talked about this a little bit, I'm thinking about our public school system. And my wife taught in the public school system for 10 years, and we have great public schools. We have great teachers. We also have some bad private schools.
Yeah.
So I don't want to lump all those together, but when you have a public school system, and actually on a side note, when you look at the history, public school was actually started by men of faith when you go to England and early America, because they wanted everybody to have an education. But the design is tough for young, energetic boys. I made a comment in the book that I wrote, Confessions, Finding Hope Through One Pastor's Doubt, that I think we could probably eliminate a lot of discipline problems in kindergarten in the first grade if we made the boys go outside and chop wood, for 30 minutes or run laps to get all that energy out. All that to say is the many of the academic public school settings are designed for little girls who come in and sit still. Mm-hmm. They're not designed, for boys who want to go conquer the world. And so you have a boy who has no evil intent. He's just energetic. He's rambunctious. He's happy. And you put him into a setting like that, and he doesn't naturally sit still.
Yeah.
And then you begin to call the boy names. Then you begin to say he's dumb. Then you begin to do all this. And he begins to either fight back violently, or he begins to embrace that.
Yeah, internalize what he's been hearing he is.
Exactly. Okay. So that in and of itself could be a topic that we can talk about just ad nauseum, mm-hmm. On how we can make education better for boys and young men.
Yeah. Yeah, we could have an episode on that one day. But yeah, so with all that, I think that's a big tool that the enemy does use. And I mean, every tool he uses is a big one. And especially this next one that you and Juan talked about, which is media, social media, mm-hmm. YouTube, TikTok, things like that. And being involved with this for so long now and seeing it's the algorithms that they're creating that they constantly, if you like something, if you watch something longer, it's going to feed you something that is like that. It's like, okay, you like that? Let me give you another. See if you like that. See if you like that. See if you like that. Then all of a sudden,
an echo chamber.
Yeah, you're in this echo chamber of ideas because that's all the algorithm wants to give you. And if you're watching the right things, which there's a lot of, I've seen this in my own. Like, so for example, I'm gonna give a little hope here, right? Because that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
Is on TikTok. I saw this one, I scrolled past, and it's just somebody doing a Bible study, just live on TikTok. So I don't know if you know, but you can go live on TikTok. But
maybe we need to do that with the man identity.
Maybe we need to try that one day. But yeah, so I scrolled past and I see it. I'm like, somebody just doing a Bible study. Cool. Well, I sat there for a second. And I was like, I looked at it, looked at the comments. Everybody's, commenting. And so then I was like, okay. And I kept scrolling. Well, then every few was another Bible study. And then I'd stop.
Okay. Yeah.
And see how many viewers they had and go, oh, cool. That's really encouraging. And keep scrolling. And I keep coming across more and more and more. And eventually I'm seeing these Bible studies all the time. Well, the opposite is true as well.
Yes.
And it's like if you're starting to watch something, so let's say a man's struggling with lust, right? Or a young boy who sees something that entices him, right? You start to see that and you sit and look a little longer. Well, then you're going to get more of those things. Mm-hmm. So it's a double-edged sword. Whereas if you're looking for these right things and you're disciplined, you can stick with this. Well, it's going to feed you good things, but more likely than not, it's going to start feeding you bad things because it's just temptation or just bad ideas, anything like that, So I think that's a big one the enemy uses. And politically too, it's just a big echo chamber. If you find stuff if you're MAGA, whatever, you're going to start seeing a bunch of MAGA stuff. If you're on the left, you're going to start seeing a bunch of stuff from the left. And it's just causing more of that division. And like we talked about earlier, that's what the enemy does. He makes us think each other is the enemy. Mm-hmm. So we just start all this infighting. But, all that to say is that's in my, because I have a little more experience with that than I do with the academia side is, I've seen the enemy use that, and, so we kind of talk about these bad ideas being circulated and just the algorithms. Well, the enemy's going to use that to push these ideologies that are opposed to the Christian worldview. Like we talked about earlier, the LGBT stuff, and I liked what what Juan said about, I love that the phrase, y'all even talked about it, was psychological castration.
Yeah, that was just a solid title for that article.
It was. He was, for a non-native English speaker, his English was really good. He was a poet with those words.
He spoke English well.
He spoke English well. Yes. Because that's what's happening today is we're getting this physical castration, literally with people, who are adhering to this trans ideology. Well, if the enemy can't get somebody to make that extreme jump, what's the next best thing? Is psychologically castrating them. And that kind of ties into the idea of castrating manhood in society today, just in regards to, the rise of femininity in manhood. And like Juan talked about, it's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because, like women don't want a weak man, but you're also told a strong, courageous man is kind of looked down on now. You can't be, it's all toxic masculinity.
And what do you do? And so many young men are caught in that trap of, what do I do?
Yeah. And so it's like, then who do you look to? What do you do? And it's just, and I think that's the importance of what we're doing here, and what people like Juan are doing with his books and with his blogs and things like that, is trying to give a voice of reason, a godly voice of reason, in a time where it seems like the world is against men.
So Juan was able to turn the feel or the direction of the series around when he talked about remembering where we had come. And a lot of that had to do with looking at generations before us, before we were in this present male identity crisis. But he also looked at the perfect man. And Justin Brierley talked about this some last week as well. And I think that's the ultimate answer, looking at the perfect man in Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And in realizing that he experienced all emotions in the right way. He experienced sadness in John chapter 11 when Lazarus died and people felt there was no hope. He experienced anger when the legalists were pushing people away from God. He had compassion. He had strength to stand up in front of Pilate and say, "Yeah, do to me whatever you want to. I know who I am, and I am the king."
And there's a scripture, and like I've told you before, and people have heard plenty of times in this podcast, I don't remember where everything's at, but there's a scripture that says we have a God who can sympathize with our weakness.
Yeah, it's in Hebrews, and I lost the passage as well. Yeah, we have a high priest who is not unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. Why? Because Jesus stepped into the flesh and dwelt among us.
Yeah. So and that just kind of emphasized kind of encapsulates everything that you just said. He understood the emotions and dealt with them the right way. He understood strength and courage and, just the man experience, from a fleshly way. And, I think y'all talked about something important here, is that, sometimes men, we know that Jesus is the ultimate man to look up to, our ultimate example of what a perfect man is supposed to be. And there's so many aspects of that, but it's like sometimes we realize how bad our shortcomings are. It's hard to see, okay, how do I fill this gap from, where I am now to where Jesus is?
Right.
And I think that leads to this point of biblical discipleship and mentorship is highly important to a young man. Somebody
we've talked about that in the show. Yeah.
Yeah. To somebody who needs that help. And it's like, okay, like for example, and this is kind of how I try to relate to the audience, is something with me. I was a highly emotional kid. I've always had big emotions. I had a stepdad who was not a big emotional person. He was, like I said before, a man's man. He was in the Marines, and I needed that to learn to put my feelings aside and go, you know what, I'm feeling this way, I'm doing this, but I got to man up and just do this anyways. This is what I signed up for. This is what I'm doing. And that was a big thing for me. And I think men need to find men to help them get through their shortcomings and find that mentorship. So I just kind of wanted to emphasize, and like we said, we've talked about that plenty of times before, is the importance of that, helping us get to that Christ-like, life.
Yeah, and I've got a challenge that will connect to this as well. But looking at Christ, looking at those who have gone before us, Matthias, you mentioned losing a scripture reference, and I've lost one now myself. But Paul made an observation in one of the epistles that we are to follow his example as he follows Christ.
Right.
So there are good mentors and there are bad mentors, and wanting to look into what is driving this man before I decide if I want to follow him.
Yeah. And that man, we could always just bring in scripture and everything and become a servant. But, it talks about the fruits of somebody. You know them by their fruits.
Yeah.
If you see the fruit of their life, that's how you can really determine, is this the right man to help me, kind of be a better man of God and be a more Christ-like man. I think with that, we'll kind of go into the 10 points that you and Juan talked about. I think the first, 10 through 4 are really good about basically how do you honor yourself, how do you honor others, how do you honor women. is kind of how I summarize that in my brain, which are all great things. And actually obviously we have not done 100% perfectly all the time, but those were things that I actually grew up learning too, like walking on the curbside, between you and the woman, stand up, shake hands, look somebody in the eyes. Like those are all things that I grew up doing. And it's like stuff that I'm making my kids learn how to do now, shaking hands and looking in the eyes and stuff like that.
And I do that a lot when I see a young boy. A lot of times you see a kid and it's like, hey, give me a high five. And I'll do that, but then I'll say, hey, why don't you shake my hand like a man?
Yeah.
So I'm already planting a seed in that boy's head that he can be a man someday. We're not shooting to be a teenager. We're shooting to be a man, to be a man. So I plant that as well. I did want to just unpack something for just a minute. He talked about dressing with intention, and that was interesting for me. For two things. One is, my vocation is preaching as a pastor, and I'm at Cypress Crossings Christian Church here on the northwest side of Houston and Cypress. And I've been in vocational ministry about 32 years now. So I've been preaching. And over the past few decades, we've had more and more preachers that are standing and they're preaching in more casual attire. And the idea, which began 3 or 4 decades ago, is that we want to make people comfortable. Sometimes people say, well, I don't know what to wear to church. And so we want to eliminate that hurdle. And I started doing that as well. I never got as crazy. I mean, there's some guys that preach in shorts and I'm like, come on.
At least wear some jeans.
Yeah. But I was thinking about this the other day, probably when I had to do jury duty. And I was thinking, you know what, if I was ever on trial, if I ever had to go to court and someone was defending me, I would want that. If it was a male, I would want that guy to show up in suit and tie. I would want that guy to take what's going on seriously. And so I'm not back to wearing a full suit and tie when I began preaching, but I usually wear a blazer. I usually wear, I'm just dressing up a little bit more. Why? Well, because this is a service where we're opening up the Word of God. This is not a church picnic. This is not a TED Talk. So I'm glad that Juan included that, because our culture, at least in America, we've gotten so stinking casual, and maybe that's why we don't take each other serious anymore.
Yeah. It's funny because I'm like, this is what I wear to work. I'm a personal trainer though. So it's like,
but see that fits what you do.
Yeah.
That fits what you do. So it's with purpose, not just getting out of bed and I'll comb my hair. No, I'm not going to comb my hair today. No big deal. But being intentional.
Yeah. And there's just something about when you dress up a little bit more than you usually do, you feel this importance or significance or this confidence too. I just want to at least that's how I feel.
I think you're right.
Yeah,
I think you're right. And Juan just, hit on this just very, very briefly. But sometimes when we just do the right thing, that will actually encourage our emotions as well.
Yeah.
We're in this depressed funk, whatever. But if we dress right, if we dress with intention, sometimes things like that will help us feel like we're acting with intention as well. So that could be an encouraging byproduct.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I want to kind of go to this one point though, that on this 10-point list, that was kind of the biggest one in my experience. And that I think was actually probably one of the most important ones. I believe it was number 3, and it was admit when you are wrong.
Yes.
That one, it's so multi-layered, because it's one thing to say, okay, I was wrong. Now it's one thing to believe it. It's one thing, because I think early in my marriage, I can admit when I was wrong, and sometimes I think I would do so to try to end the conversation, end the argument. But in my mind, I was like, well, you were more wrong here, rather than just focusing on I was wrong here. And I've kind of tried to shift my mind in this way. And I'm using marriage as an example because I was not, like y'all talked about, Juan said, I didn't meet my now fiance until I think I worked on myself for a while and became more of the man I needed to be. Well, marriage
that ties into our episode from a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. And I was going to say, marriage taught me I was not the man I I thought I was, ready for marriage. I was not the godly man that was ready for it at all. And so it's been a difficult battle for we've been married almost 7 years now, but for the first few years of it were really tough. And a lot of it was me, looking back, it's like, man, if I did this different, if I set the tone in this, no matter what she's doing, if I would have done the right thing, things would have been so much better way earlier on. We could have worked through things way easier. So it's that owning up, going, I'm wrong here. I might think you're more wrong, but it doesn't matter, because as the man, I set the tone for this marriage. As the man, where I'm wrong, it is more important that I own up and show you an example of Christ and say, hey, I was wrong here. Doesn't matter how small you think it is, But I think that's one thing. It's not just saying it, but believing it, knowing that makes a difference. And it does a big thing for your ego too, not in a boosting your ego, but tearing it down. If you can admit you're wrong, you don't have to be afraid of feeling stupid or whatever. You're like, yeah, I was wrong. You disarm not only yourself, but the other person, really.
I'm glad you noted that, Matthias, and I believe Juan was spot on. I believe is accurate. That's a good point. That I've got enough self-confidence believing in who I am. First, I'm a child of God. I have my identity from Him. Doesn't matter if I mess up or not, and that actually is a sign of confidence, and not to be arrogant or flippant, but to say, yeah, I blew it. And what's next? Learning from mistakes. And I think the proper way to do it is, I was wrong, period. I was wrong, but, or I was wrong but I was wrong, period.
Yeah.
And then we move on to what's next.
Yeah. And it'll only help you improve. It'll only help you realize, okay, I made this mistake here. When you start owning up to it, you start recognizing patterns. You start recognizing things that you need to work on, because you're going, okay, I'm doing this a lot. Or I'm seeing I'm wrong here a lot.
Is there a story here?
Is there a story? Is there patterns or something behind this? And it was funny is what's actually helped me kind of make this visualization is playing Rocket League, streaming Rocket League. When you play, because I normally play duos, which is where you have one teammate. And, it's easy if we get scored on or something to blame the teammate. That's what happens most of the time in Rocket League. If somebody's in the chat, they're going, oh, I can't rank up. How do I rank up? It's my teammates suck. And it's like, I go, that's your first problem is if you're blaming the other person, that's why you can't get better, is because you can't even own up to the mistakes, because there's always somewhere in that play that I could have done something better. That I could have made a choice that didn't, obviously if my teammate made something stupid, there was probably something before that led to that situation in the first place that I could have done better. As silly as it is, it helped me realize, like, man, there's always something I could have done better. Where's this pattern happening? So I just kind of wanted to tie that into something a little funny.
Well, that was good. The truth is that we see that a lot in guys in professional sports, in business. Something happens and, it was the fault of the guys on the line, or it was the fault of the coach, or it was the fault or whatever. And sometimes people, it is the fault of someone else, but a mature guy is going to step up and say, yeah, we all blow it. And by the way, I blew this.
Yeah.
I blew this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the one thing about leadership too, is the leader taking ownership and not just blaming his team, who he's above. Well, y'all should have done this better. You didn't do this. Well, who does it fall on? Who taught them? I think it falls on the leader. And as a man in the family, that kind of things fall on me. And the sooner you can start taking ownership, the sooner you can start learning things that you need to improve.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, here's what I want to do for our challenge this week. It's just one challenge. And I thought about that in the discussion with Juan, and he was talking about looking back, looking to the past, ultimately to Jesus, but looking at men who have gone before us. And the challenge is to pick up a biography of a man who has gone before you. Now, it could be a big one. There are biographies out there. And I've read a few that push 700 to 1,000 pages. There are also biographies out there that they're about 100. And on my blog, kingdomology.com, recent post, I've got a list of some man biographies. And some of these may be biographies of military men. Some of them may be Christian missionaries. I've got one that I've read over Martin Luther. And sometimes, guys, you may not be readers who like to read. Maybe you're like me who, I've got a little bit of dyslexia. In other words, I read slow. Yeah. And I didn't start reading a lot until I got into graduate school. But here's the point. We can't always get next to great mentors, but we can read. In addition to that, a lot of guys have a job like you, Matthias, where you're on the road a lot. And there's value in having an Audible account, or there's value. Maybe you don't have an account, but you can download. So the challenge is to start looking at biographies. Men of character, men have gone before us, and we can learn instead of constantly filling our minds with Hollywood or present politics or whatever drama is going on in our day, to look to men in the past and find out what we can learn from those guys who've gone before us.
Yeah.
That's my challenge for today.
That's a good one. Well, I think it's a pretty good challenge, Steve, considering I'm a pretty slow reader myself. So maybe I'll have to find one on Audible that's 100 pages.
That works.
But all right. Well, I think that was a good conversation with you and Juan today. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that for us in the audience.
It was a good. And everybody look Juan's stuff up on Substack. Again, we'll
it'll be in the description or show notes. Wherever it's in this link and show or wherever it's down there below. So, well, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to The Man Identity. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow, download, whatever it is on whatever platform it is. Make sure to do that. Yeah. And go ahead. And if you have any questions or would like us to cover any kind of topics or any type of guest that you have any ideas on, make sure to shoot us an email at themanidentity@gmail.com.
Yeah.
All right. And what do we always say, Steve?
Be strong. Be strong.